So if you keep having these little white dots show up on your tonsils, or maybe you're having some bad breath issues because of those, and you're kind of thinking, hey, do you mind if I freak out about this a little bit? Because I really don't think those should be there. In this video, I'm going to help you understand what these chronic tonsil stones are, why they keep coming back, and steps you can take to turn it around. You don't want to miss this.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
So to understand tonsil stones, or tonsilloliths like the cool kids call it, we need to understand that these tonsils here in the back of our mouth, well, their main job is basically to fight off infections. There's a lot of white blood cells in those tonsils, and their job is to basically get all the bad guys from coming into the system. So that's really their job there. And when we're looking at these stones, these white formations that you see on the tonsils that keep coming back, they're basically biofilms, and a biofilm is kind of like this structure that is created by these organisms, by this infection that's coming in to the system. And they basically, it's like an igloo where they're just protecting themselves over this covering, and that's what you're looking at when you're seeing these tonsil stones. And a lot of people will complain about bad breath, like these tonsil stones are giving me bad breath. And it kind of makes sense because, you know, if you put a bunch of meat in a trash can and stuck it outside for a week, you'd come back and all this stuff would be growing on there and it wouldn't smell so good. You know, all these organisms have waste and all these bioexcretion type things that can create an odor, so that can be what this bad breath is coming from. And you know, even in this picture they show there's like a film on the tongue, and this doesn't always happen for everyone that has tonsil stones, but it's common to see that film because that film can be part of that infection that's taking place in the mouth. So step number one can just be to get rid of the tonsil stones. Get rid of those protective barriers that are keeping those bad guys in your mouth like that. And some people will say that you can gargle with things like warm salt water, that can be effective. I also see a lot of people saying you can gargle with apple cider vinegar or even lemon juice or a combination of those things. And just keep in mind that those types of things have the ability to erode the enamel on your teeth. So if you're going to gargle with something that's that aggressive, you certainly want to rinse your mouth out when you're done doing that. But I like to see people use some natural antimicrobials, because I'm going to put a link in the description below to a study that shows that when you use antibiotics, it has the ability to increase the odds of a person getting some type of yeast, mold, or fungal infection. So if you're using antibiotics to wipe out all the good bacteria along with the bad guys, it kind of can set up the system for these fungal issues. Oh man, there's nobody here to keep us under control. We'll just raise all this kind of havoc and have a good party. So for people that don't want to deal with that situation, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not telling you whether you should use antibiotics or not, but I personally like to see people use natural antimicrobials when they're trying to wipe out some type of infection like this. And grapefruit seed extract, it's called GSE, that's one that seems to do really well. I'm going to put a link in the description below to a study that shows that GSE has the ability to break through some of these biofilms. Because a lot of times these biofilms are protecting the bad guys from, you know, the immune system there in the tonsils, but they can also protect them from antibiotics or natural antibiotic type situations like these antimicrobials. A lot of people also have success with garlic and oregano, and this could be something that you took as a supplement, but you could also just consume more foods that had garlic and oregano in there, and that can help decrease some infections. And I've even heard from people that gargled with this GSE as well to kind of help get through those biofilms, and they seem to think that that worked well for them. I'm also going to put a link in the description below to an article I found in the New York Times of a doctor that was talking about that you should just take a water pick and try to blast them off of your tonsils. And I actually found other people saying that they had success with this. I kind of picture just holding a fire hose up to your mouth. I don't know that that's the best way to do that, but if you've done this and had success, I want to hear about it in the comments section as well. I'm not telling you to do that, but I'll put the link to that article so you can read it and check that out. But if we're seeing this come back again and again, when we take these steps to get rid of them and then they come back, we need to start figuring out, well, why is that happening? What is the origin of this infection? And one thing to think about is that a lot of people will have an infection in their mouth, like in a tooth. Like if a tooth was pulled and there's a cavity that was not sealed up properly, a lot of dentists don't really seal those up properly, or they might give you some type of root canal that is set up in a way that there's pockets in there where infections can come in and set up camp and really thrive. And then that infection can be feeding from that tooth into the mouth all the time. So that's a possibility. And you hear a lot about people doing oil pulling. That could be worth Googling to understand how to do that. People basically just put some coconut oil in their mouth and then like swish it around for 20 minutes or so and then spit it out. It just seems to have some good antimicrobial properties. And I hear from people having success doing that when they're having infections in the mouth issues. But other things that we want to think about are that it's very possible for a person to have a sinus infection and maybe they don't even know about it. I had this problem where I had a sinus infection for a long time, but I wasn't having a lot of sinus symptoms unless I got a cold. But these sinus infections can also have biofilms, and then they'll just feed down into your mouth and even into your esophagus and into the digestive system. But I'm going to put a link to a study in the description below that showed us that when people had a chronic sinusitis issue, that they really increased the odds of them also having tonsil stones. And if you think about it, your sinuses have all these pockets and places where all these bad guys can hide out and hide in these biofilms. And that's just going to feed right down into your mouth. So now that infection could be coming from these sinuses. So you might take steps to wipe out these sinus stones and do all these gargling and using all these antimicrobials. And then a month later, it just feeds right back down from your sinuses. So it can be important to treat any possible sinus infection as well. And you could use those same antimicrobial ideas when you're trying to get rid of sinus problems. And we'll put a link in the description below for our video on chronic sinus infections, and that'll get a little more in-depth into how to tackle that situation. But one thing is you can use these antimicrobials. You can also use a neti pot, and that's basically, if you've never done that, it's just this little pot of water that you kind of stick into one nostril and pour it in, and then it goes through your sinuses and out the other nostril. It's kind of like you're waterboarding yourself. But if you put like that GSE in there, and you just put a little bit of the GSE, a lot of people will use these nasal salts in the neti pots to help clean things out, and then maybe just a drop or two of the GSE, and that might help attack some of these biofilms as well, so that you're not having this combination of, oh, I'm going to take care of it here, but it's just going to keep feeding down from the sinuses. So step number 2 becomes improving any chronic sinus infection issues. And when we're looking at that and we're thinking about other possible origins, I'm going to put a link to a study in the description below that talks about how when people use PPIs, or proton pump inhibitors, that are often used for acid reflux to turn off that digestive stomach acid so that it's not refluxing back up and creating damage to the esophagus and all the trouble that that can create. But the study showed that when people were using these PPIs, it increased the odds of them having this sinusitis type issues. So let's understand how that can come about and how that's going to relate to these tonsil stones. So when we look at this study and we see that when someone has a lack of stomach acid, why would that increase the odds of them having sinus infections? That's just weird. But what we need to understand is that when we eat food, our stomach is supposed to make hydrochloric acid, or HCl. And this stomach acid is meant to help us acidify that food so that we can break it down and get all the nutrients out of that food. That's why we eat food, is to get those nutrients out of the food. But that stomach acid is also the barrier to the whole body. When bacteria and other varmints are coming in on the food that we're eating, and they're coming in on the food that we're eating, they're supposed to die in an acid bath. They get fried by that stomach acid so they don't come in and set up camp. The problem is it's very common for someone not to be making enough stomach acid for a wide variety of reasons. They don't need to be taking a PPI like we were looking at in this study. But we know that the PPI turns off stomach acid, so if it's turning off stomach acid, that's opening the front door for all the bad guys to come in and set up camp in this stomach and say, like, oh man, this is nice here. There's no acid to fry us. We're going to raise our kids. We're going to have a keg party. We're going to thrive here. And as they thrive here, they move down in the small intestine and they thrive there as well, where they should not be. Our beneficial bacteria should be in the large intestine. We shouldn't have a lot in the small intestine or the stomach. So when these bad guys come in and set up camp, they come in because there's not enough stomach acid there. That HCl production is down for one reason or another, and then you create this bacterial overgrowth in the stomach. And a big problem with that is for a lot of these bacteria, the waste that they create is alkaline. And that further alkalizes that stomach environment and sets it up so more bad guys can come in. Now everybody's invited to come in because that stomach is just not acidic enough to fry them all. So this alkaline waste from that overgrowth can create a lot of trouble. Now to bring this back to the tonsil stones, the reason that this can be problematic is because when people are having acid reflux, it's not usually because they have too much stomach acid like advertisers want us to believe. I'll put a link to a study below that helps us understand that this acid reflux comes from someone not having enough stomach acid. At the bottom of this esophagus, there's a valve called the lower esophageal sphincter, and it opens when food comes in, and then once that food is acidified, that acid triggers that valve to close so that it doesn't come back up and burn us. The problem is, if there's not enough acid, it's not going to trigger that valve to close. And now the very small amount of acid that is there is coming back up and burning us and giving us that heartburn and all those symptoms that come along with acid reflux. So we take these PPIs to turn that acid off, and that removes that symptom. But it doesn't close this valve. So if this front door is open because there's no stomach acid and some type of varmints come in and set up camp, now they're in here. And this stuff is coming back up because the LES is not being triggered by stomach acid to close. We don't feel it because there's no acid there, so there's no symptom, but they're coming back up. So when these varmints are coming back up the esophagus, well, guess what the esophagus is attached to? Hello, it's your mouth. Right here in the mouth, and they're coming back up, so we can wipe out all these varmints in the mouth and take care of these tonsil stones. But if this system is not working correctly, any kind of overgrowth here can come right back up there. And the other trick is that with this sinuses, anything that's here can also travel up into the sinuses. So all three of these areas really need to be handled to keep these from coming back again and again. So step number 3 becomes to remove any type of overgrowth in the stomach. We need to wipe out those bad guys so that it's not coming back up into the mouth or into the sinuses. And we'll put a link in the description below for our video on steps to remove bad bacteria in the stomach. And it's similar to the steps that we were using here. You might have to be a little bit more aggressive in the stomach because they can really seep down into that mucus layer in the stomach and hide when you're trying to wipe them out. But that becomes a very important step. And then step number 4 becomes to restore any low acid problems. We need to restore that acid function in the stomach, or we're just leaving the door open and they're going to come right back in. This is why so many people see it come back over and over again. So we need to wipe them out, but then restore that acid function. And a lot of people do this by supplementing with either betaine HCl or apple cider vinegar to help acidify that stomach while they're eating their food. And apple cider vinegar can help if you just need a little bit of a boost, but most people need to supplement with betaine HCl capsules. And betaine HCl capsules are just like a supplemental form of the HCl that your stomach would normally make. And you really want to understand how to use HCl the right way. My book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, chapters 3 and 4 kind of walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion are not working correctly and the steps you can take to correct those. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below so you can get the whole thing totally for free, and then you can just jump to chapter 3 to understand how to use HCl the right way to restore that acid function. You need that to be an acidic environment to not only wipe out all the bad guys that are coming in, but you want to trigger this valve to close so that everything isn't going back up. You don't want things going back up. But you can see that the problem could originate from any of those areas. A person could have a sinus infection that's feeding down into the mouth, and then that infection could continue to feed down into the stomach and set up camp there and even move into the small intestine. But it's also possible that maybe the infection is down here or here, and when there's no acid there, things will move in the wrong direction and come back up. So maybe they're coming back up and creating this problem with the tonsil stones. So you can see there really isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to this. It kind of depends on, do you have any sinus issues going on up there? Maybe you don't have any problems down here. Maybe it's all coming from the sinus. But understanding where the problems can come from can help you dig into figuring out the right steps for you. So remember, those steps are that we first want to get rid of those tonsil stones by gargling or doing the steps of antimicrobials to get rid of those and wipe out those biofilms. And then we want to take care of any sinus infections that may be feeding down into the mouth. We want to remove any digestive overgrowth that could be coming back up since that LES valve is not closing properly. And step 4 is to restore that acid barrier and make sure that that's working correctly so that the door is not open and you're not inviting all the bad guys in month after month after month. So I hope that helps you find some answers. And if you feel like the low stomach acid might really be an issue for you, maybe you're having signs of low stomach acid like burping or bloating or constipation or acid reflux and those types of things, then you can jump over right now and check out our video on 4 steps to improve low stomach acid and get more insights there. I can't wait to hear about your results.